Boa noite, bombini, damas e caballeros e turcos, mei. Vocês estão de conta hoje em dia. Bombini, na The Triangle, nos primeiro Knowledge Network de Innovation C, hosted by the Curaçao pioneros. Meu nome é Andrew Greg Mitchell Clemens Kirchner, pero minha amistade não tem mais gewoon simplesmente Andy of Vervelo, de vez em quando. Mita de membro do team de Innovation C e de KOLEKTIVO. E me quero introduzir Liana, busnang top ng kaba, agora na comienzo. Es mais novo ao ta Sabrina, ta nos hostess. Yolanda, ta di KOLEKTIVO Grants. Rihanna Cecilia, que está escondendo caminho da de Curaçao pioneros para trás, talvez está filmando. And that's basically the whole team for now. Junto conosco nós temos Armando Galvis e Megan Stakenburg, de Sharp Media, que também está Curaçao pioneros, e Tiki nós desoriando o team. Mas como se papiamento, se entende que eu tenho que papia inglês. So we need to switch. We need to switch to English. I think in 3 languages and I talk in 3 languages. I work in 3 languages. So it can be that I just start talking Dutch in between. But that's Papierlands. We all work like that. But again, I was welcoming everyone and introducing the team so people know who to go to for information. I hope everyone registered at the entrance. If you haven't yet, you can do that later to be part of the Curaçao Pioneers talent pool, or to get an information sheet of Curaao, so you know how it's gonna work. Why is Curaao so important? Because Curaao is one of our most important tools, and at the end of the evening, before you're gonna leave, the last 10 minutes of the evening, we're gonna do a little raffle about that. And Curaao is our community coin that's gonna be the glue between everything we do. But what's above Curaao, that's KOLEKTIVO. Now, does everyone know what KOLEKTIVO means in Papiamento? The collective. And that's what we are here. There are people here in different professions with different ideas, different interests, and different specialties. But only if we work together, we become a collective. If just one of us shines and the other one hides away, we can't become a collective. So we need to help each other. I'm the one with the big mouth and easy in front of a crowd. But there are others that are way better working in a food forest, or way better doing the books, or way better doing all the other tasks that we need to do. And that's why we organize these get-togethers. We have Bangtopas, we have Knowledge and Networks, and today, this Knowledge and Network, we're gonna explain a little bit more what KOLEKTIVO stands for, and what we're trying to achieve. Now, before we go there, I just want to explain a little bit the connection between Innovation C and KOLEKTIVO, because that sometimes can get confusing. Innovation C is our technology, business, and entrepreneurship hub. It's powered by KOLEKTIVO. So that's where that connection is. KOLEKTIVO is the big framework that's going to cover many different things. I forgot to bring our impact areas. In total, we have 6 impact areas that we're focusing on. You can look them up on our website, because even I, that works with them every day, still forgets them occasionally. That being said, we're going to have 2 interesting talks. One from a lady from France that works in Germany, and one from an American dude that also works in Germany. They're going to be talking about way more interesting stuff than I can be talking about. So I'm going to keep my talk short, so they can have as much time as possible to present to you all the amazing work that they're doing. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask as much as you want. Ask them difficult questions. Let them show them how vervelen we as Curaçao can be. So we can learn as much as possible from them. Just so you know, the bar is open. Please do me a favor, sponsor the bar. Buy a drink, because for them to show up here tonight also is a big effort from their side. So buy a drink. You can buy me a drink if you don't want to drink. I'm fine with that. I'm not picky. Chardonnay, please. And I'll see you after our first talk. I want to ask forward the very nervous but very lovely Louise Borreani.
Well, hello, and thanks you all for coming, because it means a lot for us and for our work. I'm Louise. I'm a researcher working in this brand new field of research that we still have yet a little trouble naming. I name it environmental blockchain, but others may use environmental Web3 or regenerative decentralized finance, and many other names. But before we dive into the environmental parts, maybe we should ask ourselves, what is Web3 and decentralized finance even mean? So to understand Web3, you need to know that Web2 is the internet that most of society uses and knows today. So here I mean Google, Facebook, YouTube. And Web3 stands in opposition to Web2. It means that it's holistic and it's also a decentralized way to approach the internet. Web3 is open, meaning that anybody can access it at any time. Web3 is permissionless, meaning that the applications are open source and transparent. And Web3 is trustless. That it means that there is no need for trust between parties in order to interact in the Web3 sphere. So how does this work? Well, thanks to a wonderful technology that you probably know, blockchains. Blockchain don't think as it as a thing in itself, but more as a tool that enables you, instead of storing all the data in one single huge computer, to decentralize all of this data in multiple computers all around the Earth that together form a decentralized network. And for now, blockchains are mainly being referred to cryptocurrencies. So yeah, blockchain have been mainly referred to for the cryptocurrencies and mainly Bitcoin. I'm sure you know Bitcoin. But the decentralized finance can go way beyond cryptocurrencies. And actually, Bitcoin is just one among thousands of other cryptocurrencies. Actually, Bitcoin is also a huge offender to the environment, as the way it works, it's like if you would leave your car running to solve Sudoku puzzles. Anyway, what I am really interested about is to see how we can make use of this blockchain tool to the service of environmental protection and regeneration. Blockchain actually allows us to have reliable information on the health of ecosystems, to have proof of regeneration or protection of a specific space or species, and to monetize natural capital in order to introduce it in our economic system. So all of that is pretty cool. We published this month a research article where I tried to list all the environmental initiatives that are in the Web3 sphere. And here is a resume of it. As you can see, the energy sector is quite prominent, which makes sense because blockchain is very good at answering issues of management, allocation, or provenance of resources. But the environmental protection and regeneration side is also quite flourishing, which is very nice. I'm going to present you two of my favorite initiatives so you can see what I mean when I say it's quite mind-blowing. The first one is here, it's TerraZero. TerraZero proposes to create an autonomous forest. On the blockchain, we can create what's called smart contracts. Smart contracts, you can think of it like an autonomous contract that works without the need of a middleman in order to enforce it. And what this smart contract does is that it says, okay, now humans, if you want to buy lumber from the forest, you will have to pay for it. The money stays locked in the smart contract. And thanks to observers such as sensors or drones, we can report the health of the forest. Let's say the forest is doing badly. Well, then the forest can use its own money in order to pay humans to regenerate itself. Let's say the forest is doing good. Well, then it can use its own money in order to buy more land and expand. A second app that I love is ClimateDAO. It's right there. It proposes to create a stable cryptocurrency that is entirely backed by carbon assets. It means that to create money, to create value, you will have to store carbon. And the carbon will remain stored because you need or you use the money. So now you know what I say when you understand what I said when I meant blockchain can, on the environmental sphere, do pretty amazing things. I think I'm going to close this introduction with a quote from Bruno Latour, who is a French philosopher. It's, change the instruments, and you will change the entire social theory that goes with them. I will now leave the floor to Patrick, who is going to walk you more deeply into KOLEKTIVO's spot in the cryptosphere. Thanks you for listening and enjoy Patrick's talk.
My throat doesn't necessarily agree with the island climate, so I'll be taking some sips during the presentation. So, evolving KOLEKTIVO, creating co-prosperity with regenerative economics. So as Louise just presented, we have this big chart, this emerging industry that we are calling applied regenerative economics. We're able to do things with blockchain that we couldn't do before, that states are kind of limited in executing, that current institutions cannot necessarily achieve with the way that they're spending. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. But first, who am I? I'm Pat. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Pat.
Thanks, Andy. So I started work in Web3 in early 2018. I mean, everyone says this, but in early 2017, I bought some Ether. That worked out pretty well for me in the long run. Ether just had its record price today, so Bitcoin too, by the way. And I was working for a group called DAOstack. So DAOstack was working on infrastructure for DAOs. And what a DAO is, a decentralized autonomous organization. Are you all familiar? Who doesn't know what a DAO is? Raise your hand. Oh my goodness, go get a drink. So you can think of a DAO as a programmable organization. So a traditional organization, you have, for instance, someone who is the finance officer, right? And this person has the right to access the bank account, to issue payments, and that is a type of permissioning, right? And this is a type of logic. Any type of logic can be applied in smart contracts. So the same way that you have programmable monies like cryptocurrencies, you have programmable organizations, and that's what DAOs are. So I started early 2018 working on DAO infrastructure, DAO frameworks, the same way that we have the LLC as a limited liability company. That could be an example of a business framework, right? There I met Luke Weber, my partner in crime. He was still in college at that point in time, but he is absolutely the greatest human soul you will ever meet. And we worked to get the Curaao grant funding. So Luke was trying to get a DAO started in Curaçao, the Curaao. And while I was working at DAOstack, I was managing their grants program. And when I met him, I said to myself, we got to get this kid some money because there is so much potential on this island. There is so much potential in this community. There is clear leadership, there is clear diversity, and there's hunger. And so I worked to get him some funding for the Curaao. I worked to get him funding for this Curaao initiative. And we've been working together for the last 3 years pretty successfully. I got tired of working for DAOstack because I'm not a very good employee. I kind of yell at my boss. And I became a boss. So I co-founded a crypto economic design and development group headquartered in Berlin in early 2020. I got really, really lucky because that's when the pandemic started and everyone was like, okay, we're gonna go digital. And I'm like, oh, cool, I do a DAO shop. If you're going digital, we do digital orgs. So that turned into a pretty successful endeavor. We expanded from 3 people to 25 people as of yesterday. We work with 6 to 8 DAOs in the space. We do a mix of advisory, token economic design, implementation of protocols, you name it. So I like to blog and complain about capitalism, but I mostly blog. And I work on some specific issues. I work on the world's lack of collective ownership. I have a blog where I analyze ownership structures, so global equity networks. How do corporations work in practice? How do they interface with each other? Why are banks so powerful? And how do we dismantle, how do we deconstruct that power and become powerful ourselves? That is a question that, really burns me. Second question, the need for regenerative economics. Climate change is happening. If scientists told you that it's not happening, go find another scientist. Most of the consensus of the community is that this is going to be a problem. It's a huge problem. We need to create more resilient institutions. We need to do it now. We have run out of time. And finally, new institutional design possibilities, and that's where we get into DAOs. So because we have these programmable organizations now, we can structure them in any conceivable manner that logic permits. We can have something structured like a central bank. We can have something structured like a corporation. We can have new social choice algorithms that we apply that have fair distribution of ownership and funding. We can do extreme, incredible things. This is the biggest revolution in organizational design since the invention of the corporation at the beginning of financial capitalism in the 1700s. And it's happening today. That's pretty exciting. Next. Where do my values come from? Designing Regenerative Cultures. It's an incredible book. It talks about applying ecological principles to organizations so that we have happy and healthy human beings working together, which is what we want with KOLEKTIVO. The second is Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. She works in the Netherlands. They're adopting a lot of her work in ecological economics to be formal policy. Again, this is prompted by climate change and some of these challenges that are happening today and will continue to happen. The finally is Tikkun, the cybernetic hypothesis. So Curve Labs likes to brand itself as a cybernetics laboratory. Cybernetics is sort of the a science of governance, if you will. It's the science of how do we create control in systems and how do we mediate systems. This is a chart from the Designing Regenerative Cultures book that I mentioned, and this is kind of my life's work, perhaps. The idea is that we take these strict hierarchical orders, these command and control structures that corporations utilize today, that most institutions utilize today, and we want to create something that is more polycentric. Polycentrism implies recursivity. It implies organizations nested within each other, organizations, you know, in very loose formations, evolving in very organic ways. What it does not imply is something like you might see in a Big Four consulting firm today that has a very strict hierarchy and a very protocolized way of interacting with each other. I love that. We already kind of went over this with Louise's talk. Thank you, Louise. But I want to emphasize, you know, the special sauce that makes Web3 different, in that you can now become co-owners of your own platforms. One thing struck out. There was a Reddit comment about these riots that happened in Minnesota. This Black Lives Matters problem. You know, people burned down a police station. They were burning down local businesses. Primarily the Black community, and someone interviewed them and they said, you know, why are you doing this? You know, these are your businesses. And the person said, we don't own any of this. We don't have any stake in what happens to these businesses. And the nice thing about Web3 is you get to have a stake. You didn't get to own a piece of Facebook. With Web3, you can own a piece of your own social media platform. You get to finally have the sense of responsibility that ownership brings, you know, and you get to benefit from the wealth that it creates. And this is what we want to achieve with this polycentric network of DAOs. Next slide. So we start with the Curaao, which kind of fell apart, but, you know, let's talk about history. Curaao had a number of systems that made it up as an organization. The first is it had a governance system. It used a special voting consensus mechanism called holographic consensus. We don't need to go into the details. Currently informal, you can scratch that out because it doesn't exist. Identity system, it did not have an identity system. Users that were interfacing with the blockchain simply had an address and they had to sort of self-identify, say, this is my address. Monetary system, it did have a monetary system. It had Curaao, first on Ethereum and today now on Fuse, two different layer 1 blockchains. That's going to shift again. It did not have a natural capital system, and I'll define and explain what that means later on. KOLEKTIVO framework. So I dabble in systems. I do quite a bit of systems architecture. And if I told you to get a drink, I strongly recommend you do it now because we're going to talk about a lot of systems architecture for this talk. This was a white paper that I co-wrote with my colleague, Ezra Weller. Ezra is another systems architect in the Web3 space and also a partner of Crime. We've been working together for about 4 years. The KOLEKTIVO framework really dives deep into the systems that I'm going to describe today. I'm going to try to make it simple for you, or as simple as I can. But I wish myself luck in that endeavor. So what's going to be changing here? The first is our governance system. We are going to have elected executives. You might know them as stewards in the language of KOLEKTIVO. By member users, or collective member owners, as I like to think of them. Prosumers, that's another word that gets put out. In terms of our identity system, we are going to have phone numbers attached to addresses. You will be able to send Curaao to a phone number, and that person doesn't have to have a blockchain address. That person will get a notice that, hey, you know, you have some money waiting for you, and once they create an address, they'll be able to associate that address with their phone number. This is necessary because many people are new to blockchain. They're still figuring out what addresses are. They're figuring out what wallets are, but they do understand phone numbers pretty intuitively. Monetary system, community currency gilder on Cello. I call it C-Gilder. The monetary system is going to become much more complex than what Curaao is today. It is going to actually resemble, in many aspects, a central bank. And the natural capital system, once we get to the regenerative economics part, which is my favorite part, we're going to talk about tokenized land and tokenizing ecological states. So the properties of land, you know, what are the soil properties? What's growing on this thing? How do we measure the health of what's growing? And Louise and I have been going around in the last week speaking with different researchers in the community, our food forest folks, really figuring out, you know, what is an indicator of a happy and healthy and vibrant food forest. But why do we keep changing things? Because, you know, first we're on Ethereum, then we're on Fuse, Curaao, KOLEKTIVO. Everything just keeps shifting, right? The thing is, Web3 tooling's getting better. 2009, Bitcoin started. Bitcoin did not support smart contracts. Bitcoin did not have programmable organizations. When I started, DAOs didn't exist. The first DAO that successfully existed on the Ethereum platform, I was the one stewarding that pilot, and you'll see in a little bit how big the market has gotten. And with this better tooling, the fact that we work in this open source ecosystem, we can take what other people have built and we can leverage these tools. So unlike a traditional business where they copyright and make proprietary their business models, all of the code that we can use for this is completely open and transparent. And you're encouraged to steal in this type of environment. It's not even thought of as stealing. It's thought of putting together Legos for a better future for all of us. There are some key objectives that we're trying to hit, and that's why we keep evolving. We want practical benefit and use to everyone here. It doesn't matter if a bunch of literate techno nerds, you know, folks like myself are using this technology. If grandma can't benefit from it, then it's not worth making. That's truly what I believe. Self-sovereignty. You should all be able to choose through governance the type of things that you want to fund and the type of community that you want to have. You know, now that you have control of a monetary system, now that you have control of effectively your own banking structures, you need to decide, okay, what's important to you? And for that, you need a governance system. And to represent the biosphere, we want to relocalize systems to the benefit of all life. Right now, we're shipping things halfway across the world. We're generating tons of entropy as a species. That entropy is getting pushed to the edges. It is turning into risk. That risk is manifesting in volatile weather patterns, and those weather patterns are, you know, showing up in the United States this year. They're disrupting supply chains today. We experienced that at the Starbucks today. We were trying to work and they didn't have anything. And we really need to start to think about, nature's role in our collective futures, because if we don't think about nature, she's not really going to think about us. This is the DAO tooling landscape. When I started, there was next to nothing on this. So you can imagine between 2018 and today, early 2018 and today, the evolution of all of these tools has been incredible to witness and be a part of. You can see DAOstack in the upper left-hand corner, or my previous work. On the right-hand side, you can see there is a program called DeepDAO, or a website called DeepDAO, pardon me, that does its best to measure this growing ecosystem of DAOs. That number was 0 in early 2018. Today, it's about 11 billion. And I've seen that number, I think it was about 20 billion at its high, then it dropped a bit. They have different ways of measuring that number. But at the end of the day, the takeaway here is that 10 billion is going to become 100 billion, and then it is going to become 1 trillion. And that is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, let's talk architecture. So I think I mentioned this before with the shift in the phone numbers. You'll be able to send money to contacts in your phone, even if you don't have their blockchain address. One thing I wanted to note is that your phone number will be kept private on the blockchain. They use a specialized algorithm for those purposes. I know that matters to many of us. It matters to me because I don't want to get spam. You can check out Valora. Valora is Cello's native wallet, which we might be tweaking, might not be using, might be using. But I think it gives a good flavor into the type of ecosystem that we'll be dealing with. Moving towards identity, in KOLEKTIVO, moving forward, identity is going to signify various memberships. The reason we're doing that is you don't necessarily want to have someone with a certain domain expertise making decisions in another domain. In governance, this is a type of separation of powers. And this is pretty straightforward to understand. You don't necessarily want someone who knows nothing about food forest dictating how a food forest should be grown or what types of yields it should be producing. So we have created a badge system that will enable or restrict different permissions within the future interface. And you'll see some examples, some prototypes that we've been mocking of this interface. Nice. This is from the mock. We have various screens like this. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, David. You can see David's current badges. You can see ways that David can earn additional badges if he achieves some sort of domain expertise in another domain. You can see here 3 different categories: community member, steward, and project. You can imagine that these stewards, these sort of executive members, if you will have some more powers. They will be able to take some more decisions that regular users may not be able to take, simply because they are more involved with the community, and they are its community elected stewards. Moving on to the governance system. We wanted this system to follow a handful of principles. These principles foremost include representation. The governance system should be making decisions that represent the wants of this community. They should not be making decisions that represent the wants of a company in Germany or represent the wants of some institution which has nothing to do with the people on this island. The second is it should be resilient. If there is a crisis, there should continue to be liquidity, money flowing through the community. When COVID-19 happened, global liquidity dried up. Many businesses went out of business because they couldn't do business due to various restrictions and so forth. Our goal is to prevent that, and this is why we are working on this monetary system as such. Finally, the system needs to be practical. So this interface is abstracting a lot of what's going on the smart contract layer. It is really trying to make things simple for users. Because again, this has to be usable by grandma. It has to be meaningful for a wide group of stakeholders that make up the community of care that is KOLEKTIVO. So this is a proposed structure for the governance. You can imagine a general assembly, the entire community. Perhaps that includes vendors, users who are using Curaao, workers who are working on the food forest, any potential member user of this community. They will make infrequent decisions, the same way that every 4 years you may elect a president in the United States. I say may elect because it's a very interesting system these days. Secondly, you have, again, the executive class. I don't say that because they're, super important CEO types. I say that in the political sense. You have a legislative, and you typically have an executive body as well. This group will consist of small committees elected based on their specialized skills or qualities. They need to take more frequent decisions. They need to deal with the day-to-day, which not everyone here will have to deal with. And they should be able to take urgent decisions as well in the event of an emergency for the common good. So these are 3 potential voting mechanisms that could be applied. I'm not saying which one will be applied, but I'm saying that these are 3 options. The first is a novel mechanism in the blockchain space. It's called conviction voting. It's pretty simple. I put my conviction on a particular proposal, and my conviction increases over time. So it is a function of the amount of conviction that you're providing and the amount of time that you have put forward that conviction. You can just think of conviction as meaning votes. Quorum voting, that's very straightforward. You get 51% of the vote passes, right? Liquid elections. In a liquid election system, for each voter, you can either execute your votes, or you can say, you know what, Andy is a really smart guy. I think he should represent me. I think Andy should have my votes. He's kind of on top of things. So I'm going to delegate my votes to Andy. And maybe Andy says, you know what, I'm not actually that smart of a guy. So I'm going to delegate my votes to Louise. Well, Louise would get your delegated votes to Andy, as well as Andy's delegated votes to her. And that is the liquid part of it. It's a very fluid type of decision making. This is an example of what the governance interface can look like. I understand it's a little hard to read. I apologize for that. You can see this 2,500 number. That is the number of open votes. Kind of the votes in the system as it is today. That 1,500 number, that is the number of active votes, so the votes that are being applied to different initiatives. If a vote passes, you can imagine that it would be retired to the total open votes number. You can see here the 6 impact areas of KOLEKTIVO, actually. I'm going to list them out because we didn't list them before. Technical innovation, general KOLEKTIVO, maybe this isn't the 6. We'll work with it. Art and culture, social entrepreneurship, environment, and governance. You can see in the interface the related SDGs, so the various UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. We want to kind of attach, this should be an impact-focused interface. Like that, we approach the interface design with the idea, like this is going to be used to create impact in your communities. And then maybe the most important thing here is just the progress bar, seeing how much vote has been accumulated in being applied to this particular initiative. I will, strongly asterisk here, this is all conceptual work. We haven't even gotten the smart contract specification, so the logic of the smart contracts figured out yet. So everything is very fluid at this point in time. This is diving into one of those particular buckets. You can see on the bottom here, Eleanor is submitting proposals to do various things and receive funding for those various things. You can see the status, very difficult to see, but at the topmost row, it says status 6 days left. So we have 6 days left for this particular vote. We can see how many votes they've received, yes votes and no votes, and we can see the reward that they'll be receiving were this proposal to pass. I will say, because I understand like this is a problem for a lot of people, don't be shy about making proposals. As you move into a Web3 space, if you think that you can do something meaningful for your community, the #1 failure mode for DAOs is people simply don't propose anything. And we have to become co-entrepreneurs. We have to learn or unlearn that managers are going to dictate what can or what should or shouldn't be done. And we have to realize that if we want to do something, we should ask forgiveness rather than permission. This is what this governance interface at its heart exists for. Moving on to the monetary system. And do take your questions down as we're going through. I know I'm moving fast here, but I'm happy to talk about this as we get to the end of it. Andy, is that the 10-minute or the 20-minute signal? The 10-minute signal. We're going to go over. Don't hate me. The monetary system needs to be circulating, so it needs to continue to move when there's a crisis. We already talked about that. Extraction resistant. This is a difficult one. The money should stay here. The capital within the system should not be moving off the island. It should be used by this community for this community. Bitcoin is interesting in that it exists at a global layer. The people who are primarily benefiting from the increase of price in Bitcoin are the early movers into Bitcoin. From my perspective, that's not a sustainable monetary system. Capital generating. So you should be able to create new forms of capital the same way that a company can create a stock or a government can create bonds. You should be able to create and attract foreign money to invest in your local community in a very simple fashion. And it should be reliable and low risk. 1 sea guilder should always be equal to 1 guilder. You know, if it's not equal to 1 guilder, there's no faith in the system. If 1 Kuraadai today was not equal to 1 guilder, we'd have some major problems in the faith of Kuraadai. I included here on the right a mapping of Sardex. Sardex is a community currency used in the Italian autonomous zone of Sardinia. A beautiful little spot in the Mediterranean, if you ever have the chance to go. This was between 2013 and 2014. They were still quite young at the time, but they had about 50,000 transactions and 1,400 users. This is the biggest community currency in Europe today. It's much bigger now, but I wanted to use this to sort of demonstrate the size of the system that we would expect to have within a year of the system being deployed. So 50,000 transactions, 1,400 users. What is a community currency? You already know what it is because you use Kuraadai. It's a currency pegged to the local currency. System managers of community currencies, they have 2 major things they have to work on. The first is growing the marketplace. If you can't spend your currency anywhere, it's useless, right? And second is governing the parameters of the currency so that we do maintain that peg and good health for the currency. The general idea of community currencies is to improve local liquidity and to be spending currencies so that you can use this at the grocery store. You could use this for elder care, lawn care, babysitting. They are not necessarily meant for large one-off purchases. I think there's an asterisk there in that as Web3 becomes more sophisticated, larger ticket items could feasibly be purchased and used with a community currency. But the size of the community has to grow quite a bit to facilitate that. There was actually last year a gentleman in Sardex who sold a house and another gentleman who sold a boat through Sardex's community currency. I'm going to fly through this, but if you really want to understand you know, how this monetary system would work and function, there's a great video online called Analysis of the Celo Stability Mechanism. It's a very simple video. simple enough video that really talks about how we would maintain this peg between 1 sea gilder and 1 gilder. Maybe the one thing to take away here is that Curaao is crypto collateralized. So the stock of Curaao that exists is 100% backed by DAI. DAI is a cryptocurrency pegged to the dollar. So you have a cryptocurrency pegged to another cryptocurrency pegged to the US dollar. Let's just skip this. Now, the thing that's different about the system, or will be different about the system that we're imagining and working on, is that we want to include economic policies that members of the community could apply to the community. One example of an economic policy would be a cashback reward. You know, imagine you spend your Curaao at a vendor, they give you 2% back. You know, this is something that a lot of credit cards do today. This is something that we can put in the smart contracts. A second example that might be more sophisticated, a little more sci-fi, something like universal basic income. Let's say that the community has a very well collateralized reserve. You have a lot of excess capital, which could be turned into money. Why not create a monthly universal basic income for all members of KOLEKTIVO? So everyone receives some monthly allowance of sea gilder. The white paper that I wrote proposes 19 economic policies. I did an analysis of the last 200 or 300 years of socioeconomic history. I pulled this out from the way that nations behave, the way that monetary institutions behave, and so forth. We're not going to start with 19, but we are going to start testing a couple, and we are going to design the architecture in a way where additional policies could be added in the future. This is an example economic management interface. Maybe the one takeaway here is under here you can see the list of policies. You could see that they are governed from within the interface. So again, the community gets to choose what types of policies would be applied to the currency. Maybe not the community, maybe certain executives who have various economic powers, but the community ultimately elects those executives. Okay, moving on to the regenerative economics part. Can skip the first point, the second point. I've already blah-blahed about that. Okay, so we want to tokenize ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are the benefits to human beings provided by some part of an ecosystem. A good example is the reefs in Curaçao. They actually act as storm breakers. So when there is a storm, they disrupt the water in such a way that it reduces the damage done to the seashore buildings. So we want to say, okay, here is an area, right? And we are going to tokenize this area. And the value of this area, we want to relate to the value of the ecosystem services being provided. Next slide. Now, how do we do this? We create what's called a Geo NFT. An NFT, it's a non-fungible token. It's a unique digital object. Think of it, a cryptocurrency has many pieces, right? Bitcoin has 21 million pieces. An NFT has one piece. The next thing we do is we take this one piece and we split it into many pieces. So unlike Bitcoin, where you can put it back together into a single Bitcoin, the nice thing about this model is that if we do get to a point where we want to retire this market, this sharded market, if you will, sharding just means to split it up, we can choose to do so. So we can take this land, which has been split into a cryptocurrency. We can then take the cryptocurrency and turn it back into a single piece of land. We then want to monitor that piece of land, and we want to take all of that data that is collected and I shouldn't say land, I should say land and or sea. We want to take all of the data collected for this zone and attach it to this NFT, so this non-fungible token. So NFTs have unique identifiers which let us attach data to them. And we can append as much data as possible and then monetize it through the sharded pieces. Finally, we want to automate interventions into this zone. So we can say, okay, we want to have certain types of yields for the food forest, right? No, that's a bad example. We want to have a certain health for the reef. If the reef is damaged in some way, we want to automate restoration of this reef. This is called a parametric insurance, basically. So some person or sensor or satellite imagery looks at what happened to the reef and then toggles a smart contract on the blockchain, which then toggles the monetary reserve in KOLEKTIVO, which then releases money automatically to the restorers of the reef. And this is how we automate the regenerative processes in this entire system. Next slide. This is an example interface. You can see here 3 different GeoNFTs have been created. We could imagine for each food forest on the island, there would be a different GeoNFT with different data attached to it. We can see here that for this particular GeoNFT, there is some initiative attached to it. Looks like the auditor is Arjun. Thank you, Arjun, for doing that for us. Moving on. When it comes to the GeoNFTs themselves, you can have 3 different types. One of them essentially represents ownership. It's a land registry for all extensive purposes. It is privatized land. It's kind of interesting in that you could turn your land into a cryptocurrency. The second we call ecological state tokens. So this is perhaps public land or land that is rented by KOLEKTIVO. This is land where we are measuring and maintaining a certain ecological state through this automated insurance process. The third is a basket of the aforementioned. Kind of the nice thing that we can do is we can compose all of these different tokens together, which creates a single token. And this is really, really nice for anyone who is of the investor class, because they're like, I want to invest in a single token which maintains the ecological health of all of Curaçao. Well, we have such a token for you. This is how such tokens would compose upwards into a single island ecology. On the upper right, you can see these various zones representing different GeoNFTs of the reefs of Curaçao. Each of the reefs in these zones has different flora, fauna, and so forth. This was pulled from a nonprofit which studies the reefs. But you can imagine that each of these 8 zones turned into cryptocurrencies. Those cryptocurrencies basketed into a single currency, an insurance mechanism added onto that automates intervention into the health of the reefs. And now you have a self-automating financial system that represents nature. And that's what we wanted at the very beginning. This is just an example of the interface of how such a currency would look in terms of its pricing on a global market. You're probably wondering, how does such a currency get value? I'm going to fly through these real quick. How much more time do you think I should blah blah? 5 minutes? Okay, we can move quick. We can use this as collateral in KOLEKTIVO's reserve, and this is, I think, the primary takeaway that I want you to have. We can take this currency, which represents the aggregated ecological states of all of these GeoNFTs, and we can use that as the base collateral of Seagilder. So your spending currency, the currency you use on a daily basis, can be created by having this particular ecological state in the reserve. There are other local demand factors. Maybe another one to highlight is open market operations. Recently in the cryptocurrency world, someone invented a bond mechanism, so a central bank-like mechanism where you can issue bonds. They've been able to accumulate about 500 million in capital over the course of 6 months using this mechanism. I could imagine comparable numbers for something like Curaçao and KOLEKTIVO once we have this system deployed. A lot of corporations today must make green investments. There's so much liquidity at the top today. There's trillions of unspent dollars sitting in funds all around the world. They're looking for new asset classes to put that money into. This is an example of such an asset class. This is just a schematic of the insurance mechanism. I'm not going to dive into it. Looking to the future. So why are we kind of like kicking this project off, or why is it moving faster now? We've received funding from Cello to achieve this. The reason they want to do this is they would like to change 40% of their own reserve to be 40% collateralized by natural capital assets. Currently, their reserve today is about 1 billion USD. That's something around 400 million in demand. So if KOLEKTIVO can begin to create and provide natural capital assets, Cello will buy them, and Cello will use them in their own reserve, and Cello will do that to the tune of 400 million USD. So demand is not the problem here. The problem is supply. We need to create impact on the ground. We need to create healthy food forests, productive food forests. We need permaculture, we need agroforestry, we need reef management. We need all of this change. These actors here, they're part of the Climate Collective, which is a group at Cello, or a group within Cello, which is working to create these tokenized natural capital assets. What happens next? We're going to start building this thing. And don't quote me on it, but we want to have it done Q3 2022. I think that's super ambitious, and knowing my own developers, I don't anticipate that will be the case, but maybe I can yell at them. I don't know. Or I can bring them here. They would love it here. This version would ideally include just about everything I just discussed. There's more sophisticated stuff sort of beyond this. I kind of pushed that out of the presentation. I didn't want to overwhelm you. The reason we're doing this is this pilot needs to, it doesn't need to, but we need to test these ideas. And we need to test these ideas somewhere. And I think Curaçao is a really good jurisdiction to test them. Real talk here, your island has a checkered history in the global financial system, right? It's very hard to move money off the island. You have very loose regulation here. This could never be done in the US. And this would be very difficult to achieve in a handful of European jurisdictions. Here you could do this. And here you can not only do this, but the central bank, the economic minister, the prime minister, various actors of government would probably be interested in supporting this kind of effort, because we are all collectively challenged by, again, a changing climate, by more crises which are going to happen more frequently. And if we can develop these types of systems and show that they work, we can be resilient against these crises. We have some sticking points today. Designing the UX of the app is going to be a lot of fun and very, very difficult. This is a very, very early presentation. We need a fiat ramp, so we need to be able to swap C-Gilder with Gilder. That's been a bit of a challenge, getting that set up. And we need better account recovery for people who lose their cryptocurrency keys. All of you got a Curaao wallet, ideally, when you came today. Save your private key somewhere, write it down, and make sure that you never lose it, because if you do, your money is gone. What we would like to do is move to a wallet where you could select 2 or 3 guardians, and if you do happen to lose that key, you can give them the power to restore your wallet for you. But that's going to take a little bit of R&D. You need to end on a happy slide, right? So thank you all for bearing with me. This is going to take a lifetime to achieve. This is just a taste of it. But I think as we move forward, we'll see things unfold in really amazing, non-deterministic, special ways. And I'm very much looking forward to starting this journey with all of you today.
So yeah, what have we done so far? One thing that we started with is grants. One of the reasons how I got involved in this is by receiving a grant myself. As you know, I have my own postcards with my own quotes. The way I got involved was by receiving enough grant money to send out 50 postcards to people during the lockdown to get them involved, to get them motivated, to get them inspired. That was my initial entry. And when I saw how people were responding to these postcards, I understood the value of that money in cryptocurrency that was very foreign to me. And as there, I also understood what the governance meant, the voting system that he just explained. It's more democratic than our own democratic system where we choose our minister president. So after the grants, right now we're moving into the next phase. As I already explained at the beginning, Yolanda is taking over that part of the grants after Luc Weber and after me. Now Yolanda is taking over that part, and there is a whole community of stewards right now. One person especially in the art community, one person especially in the governance community, and we're looking for more in all these other impact areas. The other part is the food forest that we already started. The food forest has been funded with NFTs. As Pat already mentioned, the non-fungible tokens, the food forest is being built right now on Scherpenheuvel, Scherpenheuvel in our own language, and we are trying out what does work there, what doesn't work there, and we're trying to create a database with all the other food forests here on the island. We have a very young, ambitious young man from Curaçao working on the data collection part of that. He lives in Holland, just finishing up his thesis, but he's doing the data collection on that part. To continue with that food forest, we're looking for merchants that will buy the food that's coming from the food forest so we can keep developing the food forest. We're looking for producers that will buy produce that will come from the food forest and create products from the food forest. You can, for example, a local soap made from local products, skincare products, you can name it. You can ask this lady over here, that's why she is here. She makes, oh, sorry, I have some stability issues. It's not the two wines, it's just my spinal cord injury. So, and the next part is of course the most important part, and that's the consumers that will buy the food from the supermarkets or from the food forest, or will buy the products from the producers that will create products that will come from the food forest. And the other part, the big part, what you're also going to be part of in a bit, that's the Curaao part. And the Curaao part, that's also a little bit what he talked about, the sea gilder. It's almost the same, but we are developing it. So you're being part of that experiment and of that development. And to create that Curaao, we need two things, and those are the merchants. We have a couple of them. The biggest known one is Esperamo Supermarket, and I'm a merchant, and there are many more. If you look in the Curaao app, you can find them. And of course, the consumers. And that's also we ourselves. So that's basically where we're at right now. I'm going to open the floor for questions.
Hi, I'm Brian, and I'm Yolanda's neighbor. No, but very interesting. Thank you, Pat. I have a question about the tokenization. Shouldn't you own or control the assets you're tokenizing?
So this is why we've kind of identified these two different types of tokens. One of them representing an asset, right? So representing ownership of this particular land area, and the other representing ecological state. One of them is very, very good for the privatized ownership, right? So this is the dichotomy between the private and the public. But so much land today is either rented out or public, or something like the reefs around Curaçao, which don't have owners. And you can still give ecological states to this type of land area. It still has properties, measurable properties, and you can still intervene and do meaningful interventions into these types of areas. And this was a design challenge. We said to ourselves, how do we do this, but also do it in a way where we don't require a strict legal system to make this work? Because in some of the jurisdictions that we're looking at to potentially apply KOLEKTIVO, they don't have working legal systems. So to that end, we needed something that was extremely flexible, that doesn't necessarily rely on the concept of ownership.
Are there any legal problems KOLEKTIVO can get into later on? Because it's beginning, but what can you foresee in the government regulations, things like that, which can be a problem later on?
And for the users also, for you and us. Let's see. Sorry, to continue the question.
Yeah, no, good question. I think we should share this question a little bit.
Totally.
One, for the users, there's not much of a risk. I mean, right now you can already use Candy Cash, you can already use Fortuna, you can use already Fun Miles. Those are white. I mean, I just bought a bottle of whiskey with my Fun Miles. So that's not regulated.
Maybe further. It's not about users, it's about the collective, like the ownership of the collective. And what I foresee is, that's why I will try to make it more specific. Like the central bank, in the long run, when you get to the billions, will not like this happening. I foresee. Or other institutions, governmental institutions, because they're losing power. So what do you expect?
That's why I started with the users, and we're going to build it up to there. I mean, before you get to the billions, first you get to the thousands, and then the millions, and then the 10 millions, then the 100 millions. So by that time, I mean, right now we know already the central bank is already watching. They're already paying attention, and we're working on that, and we're ready to cooperate, but we need to work together to get there. Again, we cannot foresee the future. We couldn't foresee that COVID would happen. We didn't foresee that we needed a voedselbank right now and things like that. So that has opened many people's minds. Like, we need to look at different opportunities than to just wait till we need to hold up our hand for Holland again. So that's why we're working with legal advisors. That's why we're working with doing research, and why we are working, talking to amongst others, banks and the central bank. But it's going to take a long while before we get to that point.
Yeah, I think he's spot on. I'll preface this by saying, for the camera, I am not a legal advisor. This is not legal advice. No, really. We're dealing in a very gray regulatory zone, right? And it's becoming, the picture of how this is going to be regulated is becoming clearer over time. It's very much turning into sort of a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. In terms of the users, no problems. You know, the users are going to be fine. In terms of the collective and the ownership of that collective, that is the main sticking point that you've identified, because you know, looking at different legal forms, that's something like an unregistered partnership, right? There is a need for legal reform. There is a need to have DAOs be able to, because that's essentially what is going on here. This is a DAO, right? At the end of the day. And there is a need to, like, you know, protect the members of that collective from unlimited liability, which is the main problem here at the end of the day. In terms of, you know, where the axe would fall, if there were a proverbial axe, right here. In terms of my group, probably not, because we're a German incorporated group. We're working as a technology service provider, so we have some distance there, right? So the answer is nobody really knows. These types of problems have never come up before, so
It's so new.
it's so new, exactly. Now there is, sort of interesting and related, there is kind of a race for CBDCs in the Caribbean, central bank digital currencies. There are groups trying to become CBDC providers. Cello is one of those groups. Cello is engaging a handful of groups, central bank groups in the Caribbean to that end. I can't really comment more on that because I don't have the details myself. What I actually see happening is, you know, eventually some sort of union between groups. So I see regulators are going to wait. They're going to see what this innovation brings. The smart ones will. The less smart ones are going to, you know, come down hard, and they're going to prevent a lot of growth because they did come down too hard too soon. But the ones that wait will say, wait, this is actually hugely beneficial. You know, let's come to the table and let's figure out, you know, how we can bring this into a regulated environment.
There is already a central bank digital currency in the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean. For example, St. Lucia is part of it. I don't agree with you that the reefs are owned by nobody. It's community property, all of us. there's no owner, so it's not that easy just saying no, it's nobody's. And the third thing I would like to say is that DAOs, Wyoming now has a chance to start a DAO, an official DAO with jurisdiction Wyoming. But the whole idea of DAO is that there is no jurisdiction. That's the whole problem. As you're gonna register a DAO somewhere, actually you're using the term DAO where it shouldn't be used. Because DAO, the whole idea is that it's a decentralized group of people that are working together. That's actually what DAO should be. And there should be no headquarter or a place where it can be held responsible for what it's doing. That's my 5 cents.
There is a fair point. I want to take this back to Curaao for a second. So instead of us going all around the world to keep it local, what we're doing with Curaao is 100% backed by DAI. That means it's 100% backed by the dollar. So it's not like if something goes wrong, you lose your money. That's one. Second, we're not asking you to put in your money. You'll be earning your Curaao before you can spend it. So that's it's a whole different system. And third, the whole decentralized autonomous organization, we are creating it. So we together can give our point of views in there. We're all stewards. Right now, I'm the ecosystem facilitator because I joined since last year. But the whole idea is to get more people involved. So you can bring in your input now and you can become an active steward in it now and not later say like, hey, wait, this is not done correctly. You have the opportunity to help shape it.
If I may just unfold also, and keeping it in Curaçao, first our civil law is
Hold on, Tirza, can you tell who you are and what you are? Because I know who you are, but they don't.
Sorry, yes. My name is Tirza. I'm the owner of Prescarvi Services, and I'm a corporate law expert and AML regulatory compliance. So I work 15 years in structures and in the sector bank, close. So, and based on my experiences, I do not expect our regulator to be one of those. It will be probably one of those looking at it and working together. That's my experience for 50 years with them. They're not a police kind of regulator. They also think if it goes good, then we don't need to control it too much. So I expect them to work together with the sector. And based on what you mentioned, I was looking into that also. Knowing our way out, the way our legislative thinks, even if they go the Wyoming way, they will try to maintain the decentralization as much as possible. And that's even if they go there. Maybe they will not legislate it ever, maybe they will, probably they will, because legislating will always want to have control of things. But I don't expect it to be as strict as the Wyoming sample that I've seen until now.
I want to take this conversation in a little bit of a different angle because it's very easy to go, where does it go wrong? Let's take it somewhere, where does it go right? And why do I want to do that? Because we have some people in this room that have been doing amazing things for this island for years. And they've always been struggling, asking for the next fund and for the next fund and for the next fund to survive, to achieve something. What if they don't have to do that anymore because what they're doing is been tokenized? What if what they're doing, I'm mentioning street art scalo, I'm mentioning a food forest that can regenerate itself. What if we can create that system? Why don't we focus on that instead of focusing on what can go wrong? Because things going wrong, I can tell you many things that can go wrong. I'm the example of that. But I'm also the example of what can go right. And that's what these nights are about. What can we do if we come together as a collective instead of when we split apart and like what goes wrong?